Something is shifting, and most people haven't noticed it yet. The United States, the country that has shaped the world order for nearly 8 decades, is quietly repositioning itself, not through war, not through diplomacy, but through something far more subtle and far more dangerous: strategic withdrawal from places it once considered untouchable. When a superpower changes direction, the entire world feels it. Alliances crack, markets move, smaller nations scramble to find new protectors, and in that vacuum cash-in, other powers move in. We've seen this before. We've seen what happens when America looks away. But this time feels different. This time, the signals are coming from multiple directions at once. And if you connect the dots pair, the policy shifts, the funding cuts, the diplomatic silences train, a picture emerges that very few analysts are talking about openly. What is America actually planning? And who stands to lose the most? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll see the world a little differently. Here is the core idea topic, and I want you to sit with this for a moment. The United States is preparing for a fundamental reordering of its foreign policy. Not a minor adjustment, not a temporary pause, a genuine structural shift in how America defines its interests, its enemies, and its allies. For decades, Washington operated on a simple principle: maintain presence everywhere, so that no single rival can dominate anywhere. That doctrine built military bases across 5 continents. It kept naval fleets in the Pacific, the Persian Gulf, and the Mediterranean. It funded governments, trained armies, and shaped elections quietly but consistently. That era is ending. What's replacing it is a doctrine of selective engagement. America is no longer willing, or perhaps no longer able to be the world's permanent security guarantor. Instead, it is making calculated choices. Which regions truly matter to American power? Which alliances are worth the cost? And which commitments can be quietly abandoned without triggering immediate consequences? The answer to those questions is reshaping the globe right now. The Indo-Pacific is rising in priority. Europe is being pushed towards self-reliance. The Middle East is being recalibrated. And regions like Africa and Latin America, long treated as secondary, are suddenly becoming arenas of intense, quiet competition. But here's what most people don't realize. When America pulls back from one place, it doesn't create peace. It creates opportunity, for China, for Russia, or regional powers hungry for influence. And those powers are not waiting. They are moving with speed and purpose into every space that Washington leaves behind. This is not a story about American decline. It's a story about American choice. And the choices being made right now will define the next 30 years of global order. To understand where America is heading, you need to understand where it has been, and why that path became unsustainable. After the Second World War, the United States emerged as the undisputed architect of the global order. It built the institutions, made the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. It wrote the rules of international trade. It stationed troops in Germany, Japan, South Korea, and dozens of other nations. And it backed all of this with the most powerful military and the most dominant economy the world had ever seen. For roughly 50 years, this system worked. American power was so overwhelming that most rivals either joined the system or were too weak to seriously challenge it. Then came the cracks. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq stretched American resources and credibility to their limits. 2 decades of conflict, trillions of dollars spent, and neither country ended up as Washington had planned. The American public grew tired. The political will to sustain global commitments began to erode, not suddenly, but steadily, across multiple administrations and both political parties. At the same time, the world was changing in ways Washington underestimated. China was not simply becoming richer, it was becoming strategically ambitious. Beijing built islands in the South China Sea, expanded its navy, launched the Belt and Road Initiative, and began offering an alternative to American-led development across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Russia, meanwhile, reasserted itself in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, proving that it could still project power and disrupt Western plans when it chose to. And here's where the context becomes critical. America today is not the America of 1995. It faces real fiscal pressure, deep political divisions, and a public that is increasingly skeptical of foreign entanglements. Its infrastructure at home demands investment. Its political system is gridlocked on almost every major issue. This is the environment in which U.S. foreign policy is now being made, not from a position of unchallenged strength, Pollock, but from a position of necessary prioritization. And that changes everything about how Washington thinks and how the world must respond. Now let's go deeper, because the surface-level story, America is pulling back, misses the real complexity of what's happening. There are three specific dynamics at play, and each one carries consequences that most mainstream commentary is simply not addressing. The first dynamic is the weaponization of economic dependency. America is not abandoning the world, it is restructuring how it controls it. Military presence is expensive and politically unpopular. But economic leverage? That is quiet, deniable, and extraordinarily powerful. Washington has spent the last several years turning its financial system into a geopolitical instrument. Sanctions, dollar dependency, technology restrictions, export controls on semiconductors. These are not random policy decisions. They are the architecture of a new kind of dominance, one that doesn't require a single soldier on foreign soil. When the United States cut certain Chinese technology firms off from American chips and software, it didn't just hurt those companies. It sent a message to every nation on Earth. Your access to the global economy runs through Washington, and Washington decides who gets in and who gets cut out. This is where things get interesting, because other nations have noticed, and they are now working with real urgency to build alternatives. China's push for semiconductor self-sufficiency, the growing use of non-dollar trade settlements between Russia, China, Iran, and others saying these are not coincidences. They are direct responses to American economic pressure. The question is whether these alternatives can mature fast enough to actually challenge dollar dominance. And the honest answer is not yet. But the direction of travel is clear. The second dynamic is the quiet restructuring of alliances. America is no longer interested in maintaining alliances out of loyalty or tradition. It is demanding that its partners carry more of the burden, path, financially, militarily, and strategically. NATO members are being pushed toward higher defense spending. Gulf states are being told that American protection is no longer unconditional. Even long-standing partnerships in Asia are being tested and renegotiated in real time. What this creates is a moment of profound anxiety among U.S. allies. Nations that built their entire security architecture around American guarantees are now asking a question they never expected to ask. What if Washington isn't there when we actually need it? That anxiety is already producing consequences. Countries are hedging. They are having quiet conversations with Beijing and Moscow that they never would have entertained a decade ago. They are buying weapons from new suppliers. They are signing agreements that Washington finds uncomfortable, not because they want to abandon America, but because they can no longer afford to depend on it completely. The third dynamic, and this is what most people are missing, is the battle for the global South. Across Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East, a competition is underway that will determine the shape of the next global order. China has invested heavily in infrastructure, energy, and political relationships across these regions for years. Russia has used military partnerships and disinformation to expand its footprint, And America, for too long, treated these regions as secondary concerns. That is now changing. Washington has begun to recognize that the countries of the global South are not passive observers. They are active decision makers. They are choosing which powers to align with, which currencies to use, which development models to follow. And if the United States does not offer a compelling alternative, one that respects sovereignty and delivers real results, those nations will make choices that fundamentally alter the balance of global power. America knows this now. The question is whether it has moved quickly enough or waited too long. So where does all of this lead? Let's think through the possibilities carefully and honestly, because the future here is not fixed. It depends on decisions being made right now in capitals across the world. If America successfully completes its strategic pivot, prioritizing the Indo-Pacific, strengthening economic leverage, and re-engaging the global South with credible offers, and then what emerges could be a new kind of world order. Not American dominance as we knew it, but American leadership within a more competitive, multipolar system. In this scenario, Washington remains the most influential single power, but it shares the stage with China, a more unified Europe, and rising regional powers like India, Brazil, and Turkey. The world becomes more complex, but not necessarily more dangerous. Rules still exist, institutions still function, conflicts are managed, not eliminated. This is the optimistic outcome, and it is achievable. But it requires discipline, consistency, and a level of strategic patience that American politics does not always allow. If America's repositioning is too abrupt, Prof, if allies feel abandoned before they can stand on their own, if the global South reads American engagement as hollow, if domestic political dysfunction prevents coherent foreign policy, then the transition becomes far more unstable. In this scenario, the vacuum left by American withdrawal fills not with order, but with rivalry. Regional conflicts that American presence once suppressed begin to escalate. Multiple powers compete for influence in the same spaces simultaneously and without clear rules or referees. Those competitions turn dangerous. This is where things get genuinely alarming. Because a fragmented world is not simply a less American world. It is a world where the risk of miscalculation rises dramatically, where a local conflict in the Middle East or Southeast Asia can pull in multiple great powers before anyone intended it to. History has a name for moments like that, and it is not a comfortable name. There is a third possibility, and perhaps the most consequential one. If Beijing concludes that America's repositioning has created a window of strategic opportunity, it may act before Washington has completed its pivot. The most obvious flashpoint is Taiwan, but it is not the only one. The South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, and even certain African nations with critical mineral resources could become arenas of rapid Chinese assertion. If China moves decisively in any of these areas while America is mid-transition tabble, still recalibrating, still debating, still divided, the response from Washington becomes enormously complicated, and the credibility of American commitments globally comes into serious question. This scenario does not require a war. It only requires a moment where China acts and America hesitates. That single moment, if it comes moment, could reorder the entire global hierarchy faster than any conflict in recent memory. Here is what I want you to take away from everything we've discussed today. The world is not waiting for America to make up its mind. That is the uncomfortable truth that gets lost in the noise of daily news cycles and political debates. While Washington deliberates, while it argues internally about priorities, budgets, and commitments, and the rest of the world is already moving. Alliances are being redrawn, deals are being signed, influence is being purchased, and the architecture of the next global order is being quietly constructed, brick by brick, in places most people aren't watching. America still holds extraordinary power. its economy, its military, its technological edge, its network of alliances, none of these have vanished. But power is not static. It requires active maintenance. It requires presence, credibility, and consistency. And the moment other nations begin to doubt whether American commitments are real, that is the moment American influence begins to erode in ways that are very difficult to reverse. Here is the warning, and I want you to hear this clearly. The most dangerous period in any power transition is not when the old power falls. It is the moment of uncertainty just before the new order is established. That in-between period. When the old rules no longer hold, but the new rules haven't yet formed, is historically the most volatile. It is the period when miscalculations happen, when smaller powers take risks they normally wouldn't, when great power misread each other's intentions, when accidents become crises and crises become conflicts. We may be entering exactly that period right now. This does not mean catastrophe is inevitable, but it does mean that the decisions made in the next 5 to 10 years, by Washington, by Beijing, by Brussels, by Delhi, and by dozens of smaller capitals, will carry consequences that last for generations. The question worth sitting with long after this ends is simply this: when the next great reordering comes, will the world have the wisdom to manage it peacefully? Or will we repeat the mistakes that history has warned us about over and over again and never quite learned? That is not a question any single government can answer alone. It is a question for all of us. America's next move could shock the world,